2, 1. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So, namaskar, everyone, and with a special thanks to Garuda Prakashan, who has helped to bring two authors today, and who may be very different in their real lives in terms of their work, but are very close in terms of the themes that they write about. And while one writes about short stories, the other writes about a novel. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Bindu Tandon. Namaskar, Bindu ji.
Namaskaram.
And I am Rajat Mitra. And so we are both authors, and we are both venturing into the world of writing. And in the process, discovering the facets that writers find about the world. And today we will both share with you about how we have discovered different facets of life only to see the universal behind them. So whether it's the medium of short stories or novels, very often there are universal themes behind both. And Binduji has written a book of short stories, which I read some time back. And I was very much, it was my pleasure when the publishers asked me to have a conversation with her. And they said that since both of you have got so similar themes, why don't you just get together and have a talk? And let me say this, that authors love to talk with each other, because they suddenly feel a kinship which they don't feel with even their closest family members. It is like one author to another. So Binduji has written a book, of Beasts and Beauty. And it's an unusual title because beasts represents one end of the existence spectrum and beauty the another. So she has explained it in the beginning why she has done so. And the book is of a number of short stories, all of which I found are beautiful. I'm a clinical psychologist, and let me say this, that I cannot help but analyze when I read something. And I analyzed a lot of things. And when we were talking about it yesterday, Binduji was a little nervous. She said, "You are a clinical psychologist, and I don't know how you are going to analyze it." So I made it a further suspense by saying that I will, discuss it with tomorrow. I won't give you a hint right now. But I want to say that it is one of the most beautiful set of short stories that I've read in my life about India. And it helped me to understand about the Indian ethos, because as a clinical psychologist, I'm always searching for the roots, where our behavior comes from, where our attitude comes from. And I can say without doubt that these set of short stories will help anyone to understand a side of India and Indian's personality, where it comes from. So I would encourage everyone to read and see this book. It's a beautiful gem of a book. So that's my introduction to her. I won't take more of that. And we will analyze, discuss, or I would say discuss, not analyze, three of her short stories today, along with my book, The Infidel Next Door, which I leave it to Binduji to talk about and start.
So thank you for that very beautiful and really complimentary introduction. You have made me feel very, very confident that this book that I've written is not something that only I appreciate, but it has real merit. Believe me, as you said, authors constantly have a sense of, a little bit of lack of confidence, because they've actually bared their hearts. They've spoken from a space which is private, and they've made it public. So thank you so much for giving it, so much credit. To begin with, I'd like to welcome all the people who've joined us. They could be friends, relatives, readers, as well as people who we don't know at all. Thank you so much for joining us. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. As Rajatji said, I won't repeat too much of that. Garuda Prakashan have done a wonderful job in bringing out, in taking on very, very controversial and difficult to publish book like the Infidel Next Door. The reason I say so is because it's talking about a struggle in a country, in our country, which has believe me, in the last 70 years, maybe 100 years, not been dealt with in this way. It's it's unique. That takes courage to write something new, particularly about something which has so many strong opinions about it. So Rajatji, my compliments to you. It's really, truly a fantastic, effort that you've done. When I started your book, I have to say this. When I started reading this book, it was, it overcame me with its lyricism, with its sadness, with its, the tragedies which are embedded in it. And yet at the end of it, it fills me with a certain degree of hope, with a certain degree of light, because it's being dealt with in the most fair way possible. He has not spared any punches. Rajatji has said it as it is, but it's a book of fiction. But it's drawn from his experience as a clinical psychologist who's been working in the criminal system, both in India and abroad, and that alchemy that has happened between his experience dealing with human rights, dealing with gender violence, dealing with children who are in trouble, dealing with, yes, people who pick up the gun, who pick up stones. His clinical experience there, his experience in working with the police force has definitely brought a deep understanding. And the way I see it, there are people who become cynical, but I think Rajatji has become even more humane. So this is a very humane book. Incidentally, Rajatji is a very distinguished person, Ashoka Fellow, a Harvard alumni, and so he has many, many skills, and this book is a result of all that. At 345 pages, it's available in English and Hindi, which is wonderful. Both published by Garuda Prakashan. It's available on Amazon, and I would suggest that you, once we finish with this discussion, and if you haven't read the book and if you haven't bought it, please go and buy. It's a wonderful book, and I'm truly happy to be here today to talk to him.
Thank you, Binduji, for that wonderful introduction. And let me say this, that this is the first time I am getting such an introduction from a fellow author. So that makes it all the more special, because I have, let me confess, this is my first time with an author. I have not come, I've discussed with authors, but I've never come with an author in front of a camera. So this is my first time. So I think the way I see it, I would like the conversation to be free-flowing about the different themes that I pick up. So I would say that, for example, in your stories, though all the stories are beautiful, I picked up these three stories. One was Sculpture, one was Muninji, and one was I Fell in Love with a Tripling Gypsy. So I'll pick up the last one, in which I see it's a love story. And it is a search for a man who does not know his color, who is not sure of himself, is looking for a home. And he has come to India, he's looking for a home, he's trying to find it, and he falls in love with this woman, and they briefly meet, they have a relationship, and it fulfills some deep felt needs in their life, and they have a lot of unmet needs, and then they go their own way. and that man becomes famous, and then when he comes back, he does not recognize her. He walks past her. He has cut himself off, from that, but she still lives in those memories of him, because it is something that she found it to be a treasure, and not something that she could compartmentalize it like has. So here is a theme of loss, and bereavement and grief, and also the way they both, I would say, use sublimation, where they convert these feelings into their own ways, like the author, the man, he converts it into writing, and the woman, she carries it inside and converts it into a story. So that is the way I see it. Now, my question to you would be that what made you write this story, and if what I have said is something that is true, and if something you would like to add to that.
Okay, so in this book, the last and the longest story is I fell in love with a trippy gypsy. And you're partly right. It's interesting to hear your interpretation of this story. They are, both the girl and the boy are indeed looking for something, but the girl doesn't actually really know it. She's a professional leading a reasonably fun, mundane, everyday Mumbai life, whereas the man is actually here on a mission. He's on a mission to document what he calls the injustices of Indian society. And as we know, when we are looking for something, when we try to shine a light on something, very often it is because that space inside us is empty, or that space is disturbed. So in this case, the male, he, Antonio, he comes from Italy. He's of Indian origin. He comes here. He does his work. He has a pleasant relationship, passionate relationship with her. She, of course, falls in love. He does not fall in love because his life is on a different trajectory. He's looking to justify a hypothesis. His hypothesis is that India is deeply unjust, and that color is one of the markers of that injustice. The fact is that he himself is of the color which he condemns as being, dark, and he himself has faced rejection in the country that he lives in, which is not India, and he's unable to see the contradiction in his stating that color is what keeps the, that it's a big dividing line amongst the people who matter and the people who will achieve in India, and that is very different in his country. She is totally not of this world of thought, of contemplation, of speculation, of the social world. She comes from a different practical world, and she doesn't understand it. She does try. At the end, when he goes away, she still doesn't understand that he's abandoned her because he wasn't that important. For her, he was important. She pursues him at a certain level. And then, in a very beautiful way, very interesting way, she is drawn to research this fact, that factoid, or this fact that had brought him to India. And she finds that India is not exactly what he made it out to be, that there is prejudice, that there is a certain sense there of condescension. And so she is still, in her heart and in her mind, she's still attached to him. But she learns to discover her country for what it is. She then, comes back to the land where she has seen him, to the city. He does indeed recognize her, but the funny part is that he is talking to somebody who is very fair and who's very gregarious, and The
Yeah.
contradictions are bared even at that point, and that's her healing. She sees that this
Yeah.
was hypocrisy at its best and a very deep rooted desire to
Sure.
score over the land which he had left behind, which incidentally I find a lot of people who leave their land behind tend to want to see themselves as better, as if
Yeah.
the act of pulling themselves out indeed has made them better, which is not true. So that
Correct.
really is, yeah, my interpretation
Okay.
or the
Yeah.
reason I wrote this story. So, in your book, if we take up a stream of thought here, a theme, to begin with, Vamik Volkan, the Nobel Peace Prize nominee, had said that your book is an unforgettable read.
Yeah.
And that's very high praise. He says it's enlightening. He tells us why healing and forgiveness can take place in the midst of mass violence. It's recommended for anyone wanting to understand the conflict between the bad and good aspects of human nature. I'm told that Vamik Volkan has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize several times,
Yeah.
and
5 times.
obviously 5 times. Somewhere your book, which deals with these themes, has found a great resonance. So that's really, really, something
Yeah.
to say. Regarding this, you have mentioned that the role of memory, which is what Vamik Volkan talks about, that the role
Yeah.
of memory in healing is vital. It
Yeah.
also causes the hurt. So your book is about a 5,000-year-old civilization that has
Yeah.
been uprooted, which is the land of Rishi Kashyap, Kashmir. Um, Many people have left it and gone away, but they haven't forgotten it.
No.
Um, and they grieve. And there is something about this memory that's being passed down generations.
Yeah.
And I think it's also being passed down the generations of people who have perpetrated the violence. Would you
Yeah.
like to speak about this
Sure.
with reference
Thank
to
you.
your book?
Sure. Thank you, Binduji, for that question. I'm a psychologist, and my work is with people's memories. And today, one of the things that we realize is that there is something called intergenerational memory. Like memory cannot be killed, memory cannot be obliterated. A person like Bruno Bettelheim, the famous Jewish psychiatrist from the concentration camp, once said that if you don't resolve the memory in one generation, it will surface in the next generation, or if not in that, then in the next. But it will not die. Memory is something that is carried on. Memory is perhaps the most powerful force in human beings, in human society, and as a carry over from generation to generation. Right? We There is a saying: we do not forget. We can change the way we feel about something. We say that in psychotherapy very often because people come to us. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a therapist. People come to us and say, "I have not forgotten this," or "Can you help me forget this?" And my answer to them is that you will not forget it, but you can change the way you feel about it, right? Which is just not true of individuals, but also of entire societies. If you take societies around the world, today we have issues from the past which are surfacing. Whenever a society is in transition, whenever there is a change that is taking place in any society, the memory of the past surfaces. I mean, in the present right now, you can see the memory that was responsible behind Ram Janmabhoomi, behind temple destruction, behind the destruction of temples in Kashmir. These are issues to do with memory, and memory is always in clash with history. Memory and history don't go together because history is written by victors and memory is carried by survivors. So, for example, if you see the trauma of partition, people carry that memory within, but can you read that memory somewhere, or can you find that? The answer is no, right? Uh, there are societies which today are understanding this, they're memorializing this, they're creating memorials because they realize that you cannot run away from it, but if you make a symbol out of it, it becomes the strength of the society. Like if you see the Jewish society, they stop every year for a few minutes in memory of the Holocaust. They have created memorials, museums, books. Why did and doing all that, it did not weaken them, because if I recall what happened to my ancestors, to my parents, when I get to know my roots, it will make me a stronger person because I will connect myself to the aspects of myself which remain. Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, he said that we, carry archetypes, the collective unconscious within ourselves, which carries memories of the past, and they are universal. So whether we take today the Aborigines in Australia, the White Africa policy and how they're ruined, where if we take South Africa, if we take USA, the the Native Americans, how they were exterminated, or Africa, everywhere memory is a major issue that are dealing with. And this is also true of us in India. And as a psychologist working in India, I found this to be a major issue, and that particularly in Kashmir. And I would like to share a small story here. I used to work in the Kashmiri refugee camps. I worked there for many years. And one day while coming out, there was this man who told me that, do you know what's the name of this camp? So I said, it is Muthi camp. So he said, no, we don't call it Muthi camp. So I said, what do you call it? He smiled, looked at me and said, we call it Aurangzeb's dream. Now,
Oh,
as you see, I am a Harvard trained psychologist, and I would say that I said, "What are you talking about, man? I mean, this is Muthi camp. It's you have symptoms and going through that." So, but that that struck me somewhere. I looked and I looked into the computer when I came back, and what I realized why he said that. This was the last bunch of Kashmiri Hindus who ran away from Kashmir, making Kashmir totally Islamic, fulfilling Aurangzeb's dream. So, by saying that this camp represents Aurangzeb's dream, he was talking of a dream that he had 300 years ago and which is fulfilled right now. So when I went to him the next day, I said, thank you very much, because today my work really begins over here. I understand what you mean. So I can tell you scores of stories like that where people carry memory, which is their identity. And when I heard hundreds and hundreds of stories from them, I realized that I cannot write a clinical report about it. I have to write a book. They formed characters in my head. They formed ideas that I felt that I cannot express in any other way. Like since I worked in prisons, I had a group of men who were called pattharbaz, stone throwers. And they were stone throwers from Kashmir. And one of them was such an expert stone thrower, he could throw a stone in high in the sky and throw another stone that would hit that stone. So I said, I mean, it is great that you can throw stones like this. Why do you do it? He said, I'm doing it to free Kashmir. You know, it is something spiritual for me. So I realized that somewhere in one word, he has encapsulated the whole Kashmir problem for me by talking about it. So in one group in the Kashmiri refugee camp in Muthi itself, a group of women told my wife, who's also a psychologist, that they were all raped when they came back from there. And they were told to shut up and lodge their cases in India, because now Kashmir is going to be separate from India. So all these stories that you hear, they bother you. They shake your conscience. They don't let you sleep in the night. So that was when I started writing the book, and that's when I wrote it.
that's 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 very true. You talked about memory, and you talked about denial. Um, what is the and there is denial in your book. that
Yeah.
the entire Hindu community is going through, and it's the denial of the reality that's happened, or of their, is it are they running away from the fact that they did not do enough? Are they running away from the fact that they've been trained by their sanskar to be people who live within themselves and with, with grace? Is that why they did not fight? Is it also because um, isolated up there in the beautiful land that you have described in your book, with blue skies, with green mountains? I mean, such evocative descriptions. Is it because of the isolation that people didn't realize that there was another world which they could turn to? Um, your story begins with the at some point in the beginning, it's where Aditya, a young
Yeah.
pandit, goes back to Kashmir to rebuild the Shankaracharya temple, a Shankaracharya temple, which had been defiled 300 years back, in which his ancestors 300 years back had been slaughtered along with an entire community there. Yet his father has no desire to go back. The Acharya in the Kashi Vishwanath temple has no desire to discuss it. There is denialism at every stage, and this boy, young boy, is somehow. How did you create him? Is he? He's obviously something that needed to be very special, to be honed out of a special matti, so that
Yeah.
he could go back and put himself through the rigors of what he did. Please share
Okay.
with us denialism as well as this boy.
You are asking me a question, Binduji, perhaps only an author can ask, because I have never answered this question to anyone, though I've been interviewed many times by this, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for asking such a question. Uh, Denial, as we know, it exists in us because denial protects us. We protect ourselves, and Kashmiri Hindus have been blamed a lot for not fighting back. But what we fail to understand is that when suddenly an overwhelming sense of trauma assaults us, our first task is, how do I protect myself? Jews did not fight back because they did not understand that how, when an entire race is trying to annihilate them and the world is silent, how do they protect themselves? So the task of denial is not negative. The task of denial is to protect ourselves. And it takes an average of 1 to 2 generations, research shows, where we rise above that denial and start rising above it to write the stories. Like, for example, Kashmiri Hindus ran away in 1989. But if you see their literature or their coming together to form groups or to protest, it started 30 years later, right? Now, those 30 years took them time to regroup, to get over the sense that they have survived. The same for the Jews. 45, there was a Holocaust, but it took them quite some time, 20 to 30 years, before they could build up the museums, before they could come together and become a collective force. So, if you see, for example, there is a movement right now on talking about the Armenian genocide, which took place 100 years ago. And people wonder, why after 100 years? What were you doing so far? What they don't understand is that generation which faced it could not bear it, could not tolerate it. So they left their stories for the next generation, for the next, so 3 or 4 generations later, we start, doing so. A story like that, if we apply to the our country, it builds around our temples. Our temples were destroyed in hundreds, in thousands of numbers. And let me say this, that as a psychologist, I just don't see the temples as a religious issue. I see it also as a collective issue for Hindu identity, where they gathered together where they came together, and that was the reason why they were destroyed, so that the Hindu identity could be destroyed, right? So, I mean, I can share with you a story from my childhood, a very brief one. My father used to teach in Raisina in Bengali school next to Birla Mandir. And in Birla Mandir, I once heard a conversation between a foreign tourist, a white tourist, and I mean they were both white in this situation. They were telling the guide that this temple was built in 1939, and we want to see an older, beautiful temple for which India is so renowned. And he said, no, there are no old temples in Delhi. So they were surprised. Why? So then his wife said, "Oh, they must have all been destroyed by the Islamic invaders." And the guide said, "Yes, but we don't talk about it." So for 800, 1,000 years perhaps, there has been no majestic temple in Delhi. And in 1939, the first grand temple was built up, which was Birla Temple. There is no other temple in Delhi. Now, that is what I see uh, the history of Hindus as. Why were Hindus so scared of building a temple? The oldest church in Delhi, it is 200 years old. St. James Church, Kashmiri Gate, more than 200 years. There are gurudwaras. So it means that those communities, they still did not have so much fear like the Hindus had, who felt that if we build a grand temple, it will be destroyed, right? So they lived in denial. And as I say, that we Hindus are only emerging out of that denial right now. And we are in the protest phase where we are protesting about what has happened to us in the last 1,000 years. Even you have mentioned this in one of your stories about the 1,000 years. I mean, you see, you and I, we both carry this 1,000-year saga. We may be coming from very different backgrounds, but in our collective, we have this 1,000-year story of persecution that somewhere lies deep within, trying to, come out and burst forth, and therefore, make a change. So for me, my book is about how, no matter whether you have destroyed the temple, the sacred space, the memory around it could not be destroyed. And we are right now going back towards recreating, reclaiming that space for ourselves. That is what the book is about. And that is why the book, no major publisher wanted to publish. They said it is too
Oh,
controversial. Yeah. They all said it's beautifully written. It's like a classic. Everybody should read it, right? But they somewhere had this thing that this is too controversial. And why do you want to touch upon such a theme about destruction of temples and building of Hindu identity? One famous publisher told me, "Why don't you make your book more secular? I promise you, I'll publish it." So I said I would rather be non-secular and have it non-published rather than be published by you. I walked out of there, right? Yeah. So
so by denying, we have survived, and
yeah,
currently, by remembering, we are in the process of healing. I think that's what you're saying. The healing must happen.
yeah,
The healing must happen on both sides, right? It can it be a unilateral healing? Because in your book, you have
no,
wonderful characters who are Muslim. For instance, Javed's father,
yeah,
Professor Beg. They are
yeah,
characters of such great, of such great honesty, of such great compassion and light.
yeah,
But they are not able to communicate the message of amity. Um, in this case, I have a question. You have
yeah,
titled your book, The Infidel Next Door.
yeah,
Now, the infidel in English is an English word, it's a Christian word, it's not a
yeah,
Muslim word.
yeah,
For an Islamic thought, which is, and otherwise, as your book in Hindi is called Ek Kafir Paros Me. So
एक का
you've
फिर
used
मेरा पड़ोसी.
kafir.
Yeah,
Ek kafir mera parosi. So I understand the word infidel, the word kafir, to mean a non-believer.
yeah,
My question as I'm reading this is, Why this insistence on belief? Why a penalty for disbelief? Should this word therefore be erased, cancelled for the mental and physical scars it has caused? Who does it
Yeah,
benefit? Does it
I think
benefit the people who are believers? I don't think so,
no.
because 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 when there are perpetrators, as I mentioned at the very
Yeah,
beginning, and it's there very clearly right through your book, the
yeah,
perpetrators of violence are themselves scarred.
sure.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's my question.
sure. Again, I would say that's a very beautiful question, and it could only come from an author. Uh, so the first is that this word, as you rightly said, it's a very painful word. The word is some, it does not heal, and the in trauma, both the perpetrator and the victim, they suffer. Like if you see the World War, the Germans suffered too, the along with the Jews. I mean, if you see the way the war ended and the scars that it has left, and I have worked in Germany as a psychologist itself, and they are, dealing with the legacy of the World War even right now. I can tell you a short incident. Once I was in a workshop, and I was talking to this young German student, a German girl, and I noticed suddenly that I told her the sentence that, look, I come from a land far away, but I do understand you. And I noticed she cowered and she became like this, stiff. So I asked my colleague, who was a German herself, that have I said something wrong? So she said, no, but your voice was very hypnotic and you modulated it. So I said, we psychologists do it all the time to comfort people. And this girl was very stressed out because of the issue that she had shared. So I only said that even though I come from a different culture, I do try to understand you. And I was talking of the universality. So she says, what you said is perfect. But if you said in a flat, monotonous tone, it would have been better. Not in the way you said it, modulating and, looking at her deeply into the eye and trying to calm her down. So I said, why? I mean, I was puzzled. He said, don't you know what Hitler did to us? His voice was hypnotic. His voice was also modulating. And in Germany today, there are no hypnotherapists. Nobody modulates their voice. So you know, we don't realize that how these aspects, they remain a part of our psyche, and they affect us so, I mean, deeply in every possible way. So about healing, I mean, the trauma in Kashmir was not created by either just Pakistan or by the, say, a few hundred militants. It was created by the people over there, the Kashmiri Muslims. They came out in droves to see the Hindus leaving. They enjoyed it. They celebrated it, and it is important for them to take accountability for what they have done, to for healing and reconciliation to take place. Healing and reconciliation is never one way, it is always two ways. The perpetrator and the victim, they come together, listen to each other's stories, and in that process healing starts happening. It happened in South Africa when the whites came forward to talk about the atrocities they had done, and they said sorry. They realized they could not do anything else because there were no courts. So who would listen to the stories of all the blacks and give punishment to the whites? So when a mass level atrocity takes place like that, there is no other way for the people to come together across the table and say that, look, this is what we have done. We apologize. We understand. It was not done by my generation, but by the earlier generation. There is a beautiful book called Learning from the Germans, and the author is a friend of mine, and she was telling me that this is a process that she believes that can happen everywhere. So the characters like Professor Beg or Javed, or even the character of Anwar, it's the conscience of the Kashmiri Muslims which lies suppressed, where they don't speak up. And until and unless they understand that how the words like infidel, or how the words like, the rights of infidels, things like that, they need to obliterate, and what trauma they cause to the people, there will not be a healing which is possible. Healing and reconciliation, it cannot be there, in a empty way. There has to be an essence of that, and the essence is accountability. So that accountability must take place, and Hindus have not asked for accountability in the last 1000 years from their perpetrators. We as a society, we must start growing and asking for accountability right now. Otherwise, as a society, as people, we will become extinct. We will not be able to survive. This is what I believe firmly, and that's what the message of the book is, and that's why probably it is controversial.
Right. So in your book as well, you have shown, oddly enough, that the Pandit Aditya, when he actually raises a stone in anger, you, the author, punish him.
Yeah.
Rajat ji, you punish him, you send him into oblivion, into monkhood. What exactly is the message there? Because honestly, Gandhi ji may have had, and I know you're a Gandhian, you're a great Gandhi supporter, which is
I'm not a great Gandhi supporter. No, not like that.
okay, all
I,
right.
I see the way his ideas have expressed, but I mean, I may not call myself a great Gandhi supporter. Yeah.
I possibly have misunderstood this, but I got the impression that somewhere you believe that that his monkhood and his ability to sacrifice the ego and was something, a valuable lesson, and your Pandit has followed the same path, which was something which I thought probably came from your experience in working with so many people who were hurt and wounded, and you saw a way of healing through that path, which I'm not very sure I agree with, but that's very much part of your story.
Yeah, it is a part of my story because Aditya is influenced by Gandhi, right? That's what I write about, and that's how he finds that he cannot face the entire hostile Kashmiri Muslim population around him with violence. He's scared, and the only way he knows is to face it with the way he reads about Gandhi, and he thinks that this is what he can also do, and that is what Hindus have also done. So he follows that path, but then he realizes that when you follow that path, it is not something that it builds up a lot of internal contradictions within, and it is not possible to be like that. When people take up arms and they come and try to fight you, then either you get yourself killed, or you decide that you will follow a path like Gandhiji, but which may not either way lead to a successful outcome. So he goes for an internal search for himself, because he realizes that all what he has built up himself on, where has it taken him? Because he realizes that he needs to come out of that, in order to find a rebirth and then start again, because he loses his interest in everything in the end, in his temple, in whatever he was standing for, and he goes for answers to within. So he turns introspective. And Aditya and Anwar, both in a way, they symbolize for me the way both Hindus and Muslims need to turn inwards for answers and look at what they have done to themselves, to each other in the process. So it's a symbolic description, and it might give them
All right.
but
Okay.
I'm not one. Yeah.
Okay, I love this. On page 275, you've written, where the Aditya, the brave, young, beautiful Pandit, goes back to build his temple. And he says, as a priest, I rarely listened to suffering. I believed my mantras took care of suffering. Now I know only suffering is the truth of the world.
Yeah.
That too
I
is not a fight. That too is not a fight. That's still being too quiescent. Well, we leave that there to,
yeah.
to be read. Let our readers take the book and
Sure.
find their Aditya in there, you know?
Yeah. It's a story of every Hindu. That's the story of Aditya. In the same way that your book is all the characters, I could think of one Indian or rather reflecting that. Your stories are also the reflection of every Indian. That's what I would like to say. So we are very similar in that process. Yeah.
So you mean,
So
for instance, yeah, in sculpture, did you find something that was, uh,
yeah. In the yeah, that's what I was coming to because I think we have spent more time discussing my book than
oh,
I would
yours
have.
is,
But I think that it can never be 50-50, and I think that it's always so. What I would like is that maybe have a separate meeting for discussing just your stories in the book in the book Sculpture. Actually, I read it several times. When I read it the first time, it's about a person in search of their identity. And I have worked with cancer patients, and one of the major issues for cancer patients is disfigurement. That's what they go through and how it affects their identity. And what I find is that in the first part of the story, when she's a sculptor, when she actually tries to become a sculptor through so much of opposition, she finds her identity, her roots in that. She starts building up something, for herself. And when she finds that what she was doing for, it's based on the human body, is so ephemeral. It is something that passes away, and that I feel leads her to another sphere where she becomes deeply spiritual within herself. She turns inwards. That what is the true identity? Does the identity lie within the body, or is the identity lie in something more? That metaphor I found very beautiful in the story.
that's interesting. The story was actually born from my frustration at not finding decent handmade murtis. They were made,
Yeah,
most murtis that I go looking for are made in, even in Jaisalmer, which is the heartland of the
yeah,
Rajasthani workmanship. Even
yeah,
there, I found what was available for sale did not have the detail, it did not have the finesse that I know is there in my sculptures. It was from that distress that I started writing that story. And as
yeah,
always, I think there's not a knife you wield that doesn't turn inwards. So finally,
very
that knife did turn inwards to
good.
our protagonist. Yes, yes.
Sure. No, I think you're absolutely, right over there. But I see that it's almost like a mirror where you see yourself, uh, and one of the things that we know about art is that the power of the art lies in negating what you have believed in. It negates so much of it. And that is why it becomes so powerful because it negates what you
Okay.
have believed in, your basic beliefs. And for example, whenever you see the work of a great art, it negates what has existed previously, and I think that that is what your story shows. So I found that analogy, that it negates so much for her, and in the process she finds a new self for herself, so beautiful. So I would like to say that it was a beautiful story, perhaps the most beautiful of all, in my opinion, the most also psychoanalytically the most in-depth one. Yeah.
That's
So
so nice. Yeah. That story kind of wrote itself.
yeah,
It just poured out. Yeah.
there is a
And
flow which
okay. Yeah.
it's yeah, it seems to you seem to be at your creative best while writing that story. It seems like The others, it seems, you wrote in gaps, but this is a story you wrote like in a single flow. That's the
So
impression that I had after reading it.
very interesting. That's very perceptive of you because it actually wrote itself,
Yeah,
And um, in your book, what is notable, which is unusual again, um, something that the way you've handled the matter of sexual relationships, it's
yeah,
very overt. It's there right through. Um,
yeah.
it's there at several levels. Now, this is something which you've not put into titillate. I don't think so. But would
Yeah,
you like to share with us how you
yeah.
wrote or why you wrote those bits and sets?
Sure. Let me also say it for the third time that it's the first time I'm answering this question about my book about. It's the first time, so I am a little nervous too because yes, you are right. I did not write it to titillate, but my book is also a book of coming of age in India. Like Aditya, Anwar, Zeba, they grow up and they grow up in religious households. And in Indian households, religion and religious growth and the environment plays a very strong role. So the thing is that sexuality and religion is intermixed with each other in a deeply spiritual way in India. Like you do not find that anywhere else, in the world. So how they discover, some of it is obviously universal, but how they discover their sexuality. Like Aditya is supposed to repress his sexuality because he's a priest and he has been given a mission to build a temple, and his Gurudev extracts this as Guru Dakshina from him. And gurus do that, and still right now, they do so. So many of our priests, they repress their sexuality. It is also they sublimate their sexuality in order to, pray at the temple. And so sexuality and religion mix with each other in a very beautiful way in like if you see our temple sculptures, if you see sensuality is not seen as a sin or something that corrupts you, but something that is mixed with spirituality. So there are many incidences. For example, the way Zeba discovers her sexuality in a madrasa, and if you see Aditya, the way he discovers his sexuality on seeing Zeba and feels his attraction, towards like the way Anwar discovers his sexuality in front of a television set, and where they come to realize that certain scenes are not to be watched and certain scenes are to be watched, right? So this is coming of age in India for Indian children. So that is the way I've tried to show the sexuality, and I've also tried to show that how it plays a very both negative and repressive role at times, which it can do to damage the lives, and how it needs to be understood that the different cultural elements, how they have suppressed it over the years.
That was really very, very interesting. It was novel. In fact, I have to say this, it's a bold book. Your book is a bold book. It's an
I was
unafraid voice.
I was asked to, if I was asked to delete some of those sections, and the publisher said the same thing. Two of them at least, that these are not to titillate, but why do you want to talk about it? Why don't you just keep it, religion, coming of age, minus sexuality? And my question was, how can you talk of coming of age without describing how children discover sexuality?
So what you've written indeed is a book which is, born from your the deep knowledge that you have of human behavior, and so when you melded it into this wonderful landscape of Kashmir, it has given us this. You've not been judgmental, Rajatji, anywhere. I
No.
find that an exquisite thing. You've not called anybody bad or evil. You've called out behavior as it is and as the result is, which is honestly what is required. that this is what has happened and this is what will happen as a result of this. We're seeing behavior and its results unfold. There is no judgment. That is
Yeah.
an utterly mature way of writing, and I thank you for that.
I think, yeah.
So,
I think we are coming to an end right now, and we don't. I wish this conversation could go on, and but do we have any time for question answers or no? I think we need to come to an end over here.
we do. And I want to say that the question that occurs to me is your book fiction? Is it reportage or is it polemic? I think it's a bit of all three. It's a
Yeah.
must read for our young and old who've been fed a very one-sided narrative. So people watching this, readers, friends, please pick up this book. Pick it up in Hindi, pick it up in English. It's available on Amazon. It's it would be a learning experience. So
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Garuda Prakashan for making our interaction possible.
And
Thank you.
I would like to thank Garuda Prakashan and also Binduji to you for asking me such incisive questions. It made me really think, and I can tell you that the interview is not over as yet. I'll be thinking about your questions. So thank everybody who was listening, and we hope to come and see you again soon with another discussion. Thank you very much.